Hey, what is up everybody? How are you guys doing today? Once again, as always, I'm going to go ahead and do something a little bit different in editing video, which I never really do any editing videos, but I figured I'd go ahead and walk you through how I edit some of my pictures, specifically lightning and storm chasing pictures. I try not to do a real heavy edit on it, but a lot of little things make a big impact, so I'm going to go ahead and try this out, try something different. Hopefully you enjoy it, so let's get started. Alright, so I believe I am recording now. This is the picture I want to go ahead and show you guys. This is the edited version, and I'm going to go ahead and start from the raw image. So I'm going to take a look down here real quick. I'm going to see that it's number 3068 is my CR3 file. So I'm going to go ahead and import that. So I don't have all the other ones loaded up, so this is a fresh... Yeah, well, I guess I just imported all of them. So here's a file I'm going to work with. So I'm going to go ahead and move on over to develop here. And one thing I want to mention too is that I'm not really going to be going into Photoshop at all. Pretty much everything is going to be done in Lightroom. And there's a couple things that I've learned recently that really up the Lightroom game for doing storm photography and stuff like that. So right off of the bat, I pretty much start at the top. I go over here to the crop. Now my camera is set to shoot 16:9, so I don't always care for that. So I'm going to take this over to the original size, and then I have the full canvas to work with. So right away, looking at the power line going through the corner right here, got two different things I can do. I can take it over to Photoshop. I can do a content aware and delete that out that way. It's a very smooth, low contrast area, so it'd be really easy to do. But as you can see, my horizon here is not exactly straight, so I'm going to have to do a little cropping anyway. And I actually kind of like more of a square crop for this one. So I'm going to go ahead and unlock it. So that way I have a free crop any way I want to do it. But right away, I'm going to go ahead and straighten it. So basically what I'm doing is I'm looking for the horizon line and the grid pattern. To try and line that up. Now you can do it that way, or if I go ahead and stretch this out here, you can get this angle tool, and then basically click and hold it down on the horizon, match it up to the other side of the horizon, and let go, and that should straighten it. So I'm going to go ahead and hit enter, and it actually looks like it's leaning a little bit to the left, so I don't always like doing that because the horizon isn't always perfectly straight to be able to do that. So normally I like just go ahead and straightening it by the grid. I'm going to pull it a little bit left, and a lot of the time as well you'll have mountains or a slope or something like that, so it doesn't really make it very efficient to use this angle straightening tool over here. So I'm going to head and go with that, but I am going to pull it in because I have so much dead space over here. It's not really adding anything to the picture, so I'm going to pull it into more of a square type crop. Now I'm also keeping an eye down here for anything that I might be cutting off that I'd really want in the foreground, or possibly deleting anything. But like right down here, there's just a little bit of a bush. That's not really going to add anything at all to it. These are going to be cut in half, but I don't really have much of a choice here after I straighten it. And I didn't really have much of a composition as far as the foreground goes. Anyway, it was all about the lightning bolt. So let me go ahead and hit enter. So that's the crop. I think that looks pretty good. Next thing, I'm not going to mess with these too much right now. I just wanted to get the crop. As far as this goes, I'm going to do an auto on the white balance. So that does look pretty good, but it was a little bit more dusty, and it had a little more yellow and orange into it. So I'm just going to pull this back a little bit, 51, 58. I think this looks a little more natural to what it was looking like when I was standing there. So with the tint, it gets real funky when you mess with the tint. And interesting, it was defaulted to plus 25. I'm not sure why that is, so let me pull this back to 0, and that looks a little weird and yellowish green, so I'm just going to leave it at the plus 25 that was defaulted to. So with the exposure, now I'm going to look up here. Well, that's kind of blocking it, but I can see the bottom of my histogram over here. The exposure, I'm not going to mess with too much because it is kind of in the middle. And I kind of edit a little bit darker than most people, I think. It's real easy to go ahead and bring this up to a higher level. You know, up in there, I just really think it starts getting pretty washed out. So I don't care for that too much. And that's something I usually go back to as well. I go kind of streamline down this whole area here. But the exposure is one thing that I kind of come back and just do a last minute adjustment on. So, same with the contrast. Highlights. I usually kind of kill the highlights down a little bit. You can see the effect it makes. It's mostly over here in the brown area. But if you look at the lightning bolt, it's actually not affected all too much. A little bit. It looks a little better right there, but we're going to get back to the lightning bolt here in a minute. So that's not affecting a whole lot. I am going to drop it down a little bit just to kind of bring this down a little bit because it is a dead space and it's not adding a whole lot to the picture except for filling in the area that there's no lightning bolt. So I do like that. Shadows aren't really doing a whole lot either. I'm going to add a little thing down here to the bottom, so I'm not really going to worry about bringing the shadows up for the foreground right here. And I will add too, a lot of the times what I will do is when I want to find out what I want to do with one of these sliders, whether it's contrast or texture or clarity or something like that, I'll just kind of grab it and I'll move it all the way over and see what that looks like, see the effect that it gets, take it all the way down, see the effect that it gets, and then I'll go ahead and decide on where to put it. So as of right now, shadows I'm going to go ahead and leave. The whites, I do kind of the same thing. Okay, obviously that's not going to work. Bring it all the way down. That just kind of looks a little drab. And you do need a little bit of contrast. Shooting in RAW, you have to add contrast back into it. So I'm going to go ahead and do that here. I'm just going to move it up a little bit to about 33. And then with the blacks, I kind of do the same thing. I'm going to bring it back down. See, whenever you move this all the way up, not so much, move it all the way down, it does really make that blue part of the sky pop. And obviously it makes this orange part pop as well. But that just looks a little crazy and unrealistic. So I do like the idea of pulling this down quite a bit. Not an insane amount, but I'm going to go ahead and go about right there. It just brings a little bit of depth back into that blue, which I like. Okay, moving up to here, texture, clarity, dehaze. Okay, now let me take a second here. There's big debate in the storm chasing community and people that take pictures of lightning and all photography for that matter, on how much clarity, texture, and kind of artificial intelligence. I don't know if it's artificial intelligence, but these three sliders can really tick some people off online. It can make some people happy. It can get a ton of likes just pegging that clarity slider all the way over. Do what you want to do. You know, it's all good. And let me show you real quick. If you don't know about these sliders, you can move the clarity slider over. And this is going to really kind of make the foreground unreal. It's not doing a whole lot to the background except it makes the clouds kind of look like a painting or something. And then you can go all the way back, and this definitely makes it look like a watercolor type painting, something along those lines. The texture slider kind of does the same thing as well. It just makes these clouds very unrealistic. and then bringing it all the way down really just makes it look like it was very out of focus with no texture onto it. So a lot of times what I'll do is if I want to add clarity and I like what the clarity is going to do to a picture, say I'll move it up that far, I'll pull the texture back a little bit to kind of counteract a lot of that craziness that goes on. Now with these sliders, at least clarity and dehaze, it's a combination that does a lot of things. So when you move like your dehaze slider, for instance, it's going to add a lot of saturation and other things along with that. So it's a group of effects that are taking place when you move that dehaze slider. So just keep that in mind. You can counteract by moving the dehaze slider up and then bring your vibrance down. You can still kind of make it look decent. That looks a little weird, but so I'm gonna kind of leave those for now. I might put a little bit of texture into it, and I think I'm gonna leave the clarity where it is. Dehaze, I love the dehaze slider. I think it does a lot of good things that I would normally be doing anyway, but a little bit goes a long ways. So I'm just gonna add, let me see where that is normally. That's at plus 11. Not a whole lot, just a touch. So vibrance and saturation. You know, the vibrance really brings out the blue and the gold or yellow. Saturation's doing the same thing but less on the blues. You know, obviously that's pretty much black and white, but it's really bringing out a little more of this rainbow right in here as well too that you can kind of barely see. But I don't know, I kind of like a little bit of the blue with a little less orange, just to kind of bring a little contrast between the two colors. So I'm going to add just a little bit of vibrance right there. With the colors though, I am going to come over here to these panels. The hue I don't mess with too much. You start getting very unrealistic with it. You know, I mean, just to like the blue slider right here. Okay, let's make a green sky. A lot of people like to do that. I personally don't. Or purples or something like that. So you can get kind of crazy. You can get creative with that if you want to. That's all good. I do use the luminance quite a bit. So let me come down here to the blue. Okay, obviously that looks a little nuclear, but I am going to bump it up just to kind of brighten it, and it's going to help draw the eye over to this lightning bolt. The lightning bolt's pretty prevalent anyway, and it's definitely going to capture the eye, but adding a little bit of contrast and brightness, bright things are going to attract the eye. Contrast is going to attract the eye as well. So I'm just going to shift a little bit more. Hey, there's a lightning bolt over here. Go ahead and take a look. So I'm going to do something else a little bit later at the very end to kind of help that as well. So yeah, just a little bit of a bump. I'm just going staring at it. 22. Yeah, 22 seems pretty good. 20, that'll work. Minor little differences. Saturation. A little bit of saturation looks good. Not much, because you do have to add some saturation back into it. Yeah, so about 12 or so. That is looking pretty good. Just to kind of go back, this is a different shot, but that's the basic edit on how it was. And here's where we are. You can kind of look at the blues. That purple is a little, I don't care for it. So the saturation, purple, peg it all the way up, see what I'm looking at, and that's pretty much just the outlines. I'm more worried about this area in here. So I am going to pull that back just a tad, because I don't really care for the purple. And that's kind of an outline as well. That's not going to do too much, so I'm just going to leave that. So with the blues, it's the blue. Okay, so I'm going to bring this back down. I forgot what it was, 20 or something like that. But I am getting a little bit of that magenta and purple in here. So with the hue, I am going to correct it See what that does. Oh, see, that does a lot right there. So it is a purple. I'm going to bring this back to a little more blue instead of having that purple hue. And I'm looking at this area right in here. So there wasn't really any purple in the sky right there. And it was all blue. So right there it looks about good. Just pulling some of that purple out of this area, keeping it a blue sky. So I've got a couple corrections here. Not a lot, just subtle little differences. Sharpening. One thing I do is I get this grabber and I get something that's high contrast. Right there looks pretty good. And it's right on that cloud, got some dark and light. Slide it all the way up, you can see a lot of artifacting going on right there. Bring it back to you don't really see it, and I still see it there. Even just a little tiny bit on this shot makes a big difference. So another thing that I do is this masking slider. It's going to let you know exactly what you are affecting with the sharpening. So if you come in and hold the Alt key, this is basically like a mask that's going to let you know exactly what you sharpen. So looking at this over here in that area, white is going to be revealing, black is going to be concealing, just like in Photoshop. So we're going to deal with the lightning bolt later, so I'm not too worried about that. I noticed actually some banding going on in here because it's starting to get pushed a little bit. So I'm going to pull that out. That looks pretty good. So just a little bit in the foreground and around in the clouds and stuff. So now lens correcting. I already got this set to default, so it's removing chromatic aberration and the lens correction. So that is good to go. So now I'm going to come back up and I'm looking at this whole thing and it just looks a little bit saturated. I pulled a little more blue out, changed the blue. This has gotten pretty saturated. So just in general, I'm going to pull the saturation down just a little bit. I don't want to go too far on it. That's too far. That's pretty good. So we're looking at 11. Looking at it normally, it looks, just too much. So that looks a lot better. Now there was a lot of dynamic colors going on in this storm. This was mostly all dust in this area, and there did happen to be some sky in the background that was clear of clouds that looked pretty good. I positioned myself in a way to where I was catching the edge of this rain foot right here, and I wanted that contrast, and that's something I set myself up to get from the beginning. So alright, so that's where we're sitting right now, and if kind of come back, it's not a big difference between these two, and actually I can do this before and after. So it's just a little bit of bump in contrast, a little bit of bump in color. The rain shaft is just a little bit different, not too much. It's just a little fuller over here than it is on the original, and the blues are popping a lot more over here. So and of course the foreground is a little more saturated and quite a bit darker because I dropped those blacks down. Now something I've kind of recently learned, and I don't know if it was with a new update or if it's always been here and I just never really looked at it, never knew it was there. But I always use a gradient filter. That's one of the things that I just really like. You got to be really careful with it so you don't get a lot of haloing. You don't get the that line going across, or if you darken the sky, the top of your trees are going to be black and then it's green on the bottom, and just it can go bad real quick. One thing I noticed here, if you click on the gradient filter, you're going to have all your basic things. One thing I like to do is grab the exposure and bring it all the way up. So that way whenever I bring it in, I know exactly where that fade is, how much of a fade there is, and what's being affected. So what I'm going to be doing here is I really want to attack this. Oop, don't need that. Let's delete that. I'm really going to attack this lightning bolt. So here's what I'm going to do. I am going to do a pretty thin fade on it. Bring that in here. And I'm also going to go, where is it? There we go. Vertical. So I'm basically going to split it. Now I'm not worried. Normally, if you do this, you're going to get a difference in luminosity and you're going to get a difference in color and stuff for the foreground. This being the perfect example, and that's why I like to go ahead and crank that exposure all the way up. So there's a little workaround nowadays. So what I want to do here is I don't want to go too crazy, but I do want to completely cover that lightning bolt up. Now I'm going to pull this out just to fade it a little bit, just in case there's any kind of weird stuff that goes on. I want it to kind of bleed off pretty evenly. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and reset the exposure to where it's back to normal. I'm all the way down here at the bottom, and we have this called a range mask. This is basically similar to using a luminosity mask in Photoshop. I think this is a really, really cool tool, especially for doing lightning and stuff like that. Because if you come back, let me go ahead and delete this real quick. I'm going to come back up to all my basic settings here and grabbing that clarity slider and bringing it up. And you see what it does. I mean, I don't know what to say, but you know what the clarity slider does. And I just don't like that look at all. I really like what it does to a lightning bolt, but yeah, just not a whole bunch. Doesn't get, it's not really a positive thing. In fact, I think I'm going to pull this back just a little bit more, because coming back and looking at it after I just did that, I don't need that much. So anyway, what I'm going to go ahead and do, I'm going to come back to this gradient slider. I'm going to move this over. Let me turn it up just to see where I'm looking at. So I'm going to set it back up to the way it was. That will work. Bring the exposure back to 0. And I'm going to come over here to the range mask. So you get a couple different options. You have off, of course, color, luminance, and depth. Depth I don't know anything about. It's always been grayed out for me. Luminance is going to be luminosity. I like a luminosity mask. And then you can go on the color side of it. But right now I'm going to use the luminance. So it's going to come up with this little sub menu right here. This is going to be affecting your darks. So if you get this slider right here and move it all the way down, it's going to affect all your darker colors, like in the luminosity masks, your shadows and your blacks, and you can just do adjustments to those. This one on the left, moving it over to the right, is going to be all your lights. So this is kind of set to medium. So this is going to be basically medium. This is going to bring you to medium dark, and then dark, medium light, light. So that's kind of how you do that. So we're wanting to target this lightning bolt. That is going to be the lightest of lights. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. You also have show the luminosity mask. So let me show you real quick. I'm just going to set this back to medium. And this is basically what your normal gradient filter in Lightroom is going to look like. It does put it black and white over here, and it shows it like a mask, basically like in Photoshop. So let me show you real quick. When I slide this over to medium dark, everything red is going to be affected by whatever settings I give it. So that's a medium dark, that's dark, so it's only going to target this red area down here in the deep shadows. So moving this over medium light, and you can see it's really starting to kind of focus in on that lightning bolt, bringing in more and more and more. And actually that looks pretty good. I want to get rid of a little bit that's right here and a little bit in the clouds, you know, compared to there. So there we go, that looks good. It's kind of pink. It's not very strong as far as the mask goes, but this is the only thing that's going to be affected. A little bit in the clouds right there. Oops, keep doing that. So a little bit affected in the clouds, just a faint part up here, and mostly that lightning bolt, because that lightning bolt's all pink. So now with that set, I can come back here. I'm going to go ahead and turn the show luminance mask off, but it's still going to only affect basically that lightning bolt. So I can come in here and really crank this up. I just maxed the exposure out. So that looks a little bright up in here, but man, that lightning bolt looks really good. Another thing too is you're not affecting much else other than what you want to affect as far as making the edits. So like the clarity slider, one of the big things, it's a no-no. It's, yeah, not a no-no, but a lot of people really look down on the clarity slider because it is overused a whole lot. But when you're only affecting this little area right here, you can get that clarity slider and just peg it all the way over, and you barely even notice it. So I'm going to go ahead and go max to minimum to max so you can kind of see what it looks like. So there's a little bit of effect right in here, a little bit down in here, and a little bit up here, and it doesn't even affect the lightning bolt too much. So I'm going to reset that. That's not doing much. Texture. It does a little bit. I mean, it really kind of makes it pop a little more over in here. But mostly what I'm going to look at is these over here. A little bit of contrast. I'm going to bring the contrast down. It lightens this up. Putting the contrast in, it kind of darkens it. So I already know that what I'm going to do is going to be lightening it. So I'm going to use a little contrast to darken the dynamic range on it. And then start playing with these. So the highlights, a little bit of white. Yeah, I'm just going to peg it. Shadows, or actually blacks. I do kind of like how it lights up this area here, but I'm not going to emphasize that too much. Yeah, black isn't doing a whole lot. Dehaze. See, I think that gives it a pretty good look there too. Usually when you kick that dehaze slider all the way over, it gets crazy. It turns into a carnival on your picture. But just since we're only doing this little tiny bit, I think it adds quite a bit to it. I mean, I do like up here in the clouds lightening up a little bit. Kick that all the way over. It kind of smooths it out a little bit, and it doesn't make this pop so much. Doesn't make that pop so much. But it really makes the lightning bolt kind of pop. So I think we're good on that. I'm going to go ahead and close that, close that. Now you can really see, I'm going to go ahead and click to activate this one again and just kind of show you the before and after. That's without, and that is with. Without, with. So it really kind of brings the highlights out of the clouds in the sky. Actually the sky, not the clouds, and a little bit up in here too, which it's kind of nice to see the starting point of the lightning bolt compared to it just kind of blending in, and it doesn't look quite as good. I do like the look of that right there though. It just makes it pop a little more. Alright, so I'm going to back out of that. One thing I've been sitting here looking at is I see all this yellow. It's just a little bit too much yellow for me. So I am going to go back into here. Into the hues, saturation for the yellows, peg it all the way down, all the way up. That's the one I'm looking at, so I am going to pull some of the yellows out, just so it's not so hard on the brain. And oranges, so you bring the orange all the way up and you get a lot of weird artifacting right there. Bring it all the way down and it kills a lot of the color. It doesn't look all that bad, but we do need some orange in there. Yeah, right at zeros, it looks pretty good. But pulling that yellow out, it really calmed that horizon down quite a bit. So that is about it. There's one last thing that I like to do. No vignetting. And it's kind of what I've done is a little bit of a signature for some time. There's a couple photographers, international photographers, that do what's called dark processing. They darken up the foreground to really make the subject of the photograph, like shooting through trees at a waterfall, makes that waterfall pop. I kind of do the difference. Since storm chasing, you really don't have time to set up a good composition. You don't really have a lot of time to set up a good composition. So the foregrounds are usually kind of drab and just not really exciting. If you can get one, that's great, awesome. But you kind of got to take what's given to you out there. So with that, as far as composition goes, you have your leading lines and your spirals and stuff like that. This doesn't really have a whole lot. It's just kind of in your face. It's a lightning bolt. But having the contrast over here in the lighter part of it definitely draws your eye to it compared to over here. So this is lacking a little bit. One thing I like to do, I'm just going to show you real quick. I get a radial filter. So I'm going to get a radial filter. I'm going to put it on invert so I affect what's inside the filter, not outside the filter. And I'm going to get me an oval shape. Again, the same thing I do. I'm going to put the exposure all the way up so I know what I'm working with. I'm going to spin it like that. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger, a little less of an oval. So I'm sitting here looking at it. Twist it into about that. So basically what I'm doing is I want a leading line to point over here to the lightning bolt. Preferably down in this area, and that'll kind of give a spiral, because I'm going to try to get a leading line this way, psychologically leading line, up to here, and this is kind of bending, so it kind of gets a spiral right there, or it's going to come all the way down through the clouds and come back around. So let's do this, and here's what I do. So I'm going to go ahead and reset the exposure. I'm going to bring this down, actually make it a little bit bigger, almost round. And here's basically what I'm going to do is this is going to be a dome down here. Oh, it's going to be a dome, but it's kind of favoring, like it's pointing to the left out into this area, being that it's kind of a egg-shaped. Right here, this is pointing out this way. So even when you bring it down here, it kind of gives the idea that it's pointing that way a little bit. I'm going to emphasize that just a little bit more with that. Like so. So now what I come in here and do is I'm just going to lighten the foreground a little bit right here. And I've got a real hard, the feathering on here. Of course, you obviously don't want to go, zero feather, or it's going to look like that, which is not even a choice. And then if you go 100%, it's barely even noticeable. So I like to bring it in about like that. But your full effect, as you can see here, the full effect is like right around here. So I'm going to kind of go in between here and here, around right there, for the area that I want affected. So right now this area here and on the inside of it is going to be exactly the setting that I have. Then it's going to fade out through the trees, and then it's not going to affect the sky at all. So I'm going to move back up here. It actually is affecting the sky a little bit. So I'm going to be careful of that. I've never really noticed it. So I'm not going to do too much. I'll add a little bit of an exposure bump. And then shadows are going to be the big one. And bring that up. Blacks. So you got the feathering on it, so it's not a huge bump. It's not a huge dramatic change because it's kind of like a 50% opacity. whites. So all I'm doing is I'm getting this area and I'm kind of lightening it up. Let me bring the whites down. I'm going to go for a little more exposure. Alright, and there we go. Maybe move it over a little bit. That looks pretty good. So let me go ahead and get rid of all that, and now you see it's just a nice highlighted area here. So, you know, if you even look over here and see it at a distance, your eye is going to go right to there, but you're going to kind of focus on this as well. See the foreground, and then it's just kind of bring you up and around. So kind of like a little bit of a spiral right there. So it just kind of helps composition, even though it's doing it after the fact, but it helps it out. So that is about it. That's how I edit most of my images. Sometimes a little more simple, sometimes a little more complex. I don't really have a lot of worries right now with dust spots or anything like that, so I'm not doing much of that. But let's go ahead and take a look at the before and after. Now with subtle changes, I have a lot of changes done to this, as you all saw, but it's not a drastic change. It's not like, okay, well it's not even the same picture anymore, you know, which you see that a lot. Just enhanced the blues a little bit, enhanced a little bit of the contrast, enhanced, if you see the lightning bolt, I mean, I just really made that lightning bolt pop quite a bit, and especially against the darker background. It just really separates it and makes it look real nice. There isn't a whole lot of change over in here, you know, with the rain foot and the dust that's coming out. I even think the saturation of the rainbow went down a little bit, maybe. Kind of hard to tell, but let me see if I can do this. Control F, full frame. No, I know there's a way to go full screen with this, but you know, you can go ahead and you can see the difference on them right here, and yeah, I think that looks pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead and do this. I already have a copy of this saved. Yeah, so just kind of a quick overview. Got rid of some of the purple over here, highlighted this, made that lightning bolt pop just a little bit more, lightened up the foreground to kind of shift your eye over towards that lightning bolt, like saying, hey, look over here, just in case you do look at the foreground right away, even though the lightning bolt's going to definitely grab your attention. But yeah, just a little bit of an enhancement, and that is how I edit most of my pictures. So maybe I'll do some other ones here in the future. Things are going to be a little bit different. If you like this kind of video, let me know. And I will see you guys next time. You have a great day. Thanks. Bye.